I'm very excited to introduce the encyclopedic, artistic, and et cetera, amazing Patrick Blanc, who is, I believe, going to give a great gift to our city. The project at Drew School was brought to my attention randomly. I immediately called the school and asked if I could come and talk to them about it, and within a few hours I was in a meeting with members of the staff, the academy, and the architectural team that's working on the project with Patrick. They're very generous with sharing the project, and it's a public-facing work of art and horticulture that we'll all be able to walk by and enjoy. And I just want to thank Patrick for everything he's bringing to the city, and welcome him on behalf of the Academy.
Merci. Thank you. Thank you to be here this evening. So many people, so it means that I think that to try to introduce plants in the towns means something now. 10 years ago, few people were interested by this, but now, of course, and now that more than half the population of the world is living in towns, of course, it's important to try to have some connection, new connections between nature and towns, and vertical gardens are one of the ways, not the only way, but it's one of the ways. And so I'm very happy for this project at Drew School, because when Bonnie Fischer did contact me quite a long time ago, at least 3 years ago, she had some difficulties because it's not always, especially at that time, it was not so easy to contact me. So finally, she did find me through Jean Nouvel Architects, and she was speaking to me about a project in San Francisco. So first of all, I was interested because it's a Mediterranean climate, and I did never do vertical gardens in a Mediterranean climate. And also, as you know, in Europe, we cultivate many plants originating from California. So for me, it was quite exciting to do a project in California. And also, this school is also very much involved in artistic works. And artistic works is, of course, one very important thing by itself, but also if the young people are trained in artistic things, it means also that they can be receptive to many other things from nature, for instance, because in many ways, you know, since very long time, artists have always been inspired by nature. So when I came 1.5 years ago, and when I met Sam at the head of the Drew School, we had discussions, and we did know that it was really a possibility to make an interesting project, and I did explain that I should like to have only a project with native Californian species, not simply from San Francisco area, but from California. And we did 1.5 years ago visit many nurseries. I did visit also many natural places. So the project actually did take the roots, and it was finally Bonnie and Sam, they did take in charge everything about contracts and everything. And so finally, when Sylvain Bidot, who is here, who managed the installation of my vertical gardens all over the world since about 10 years, when he did arrive some days ago, he told me, oh, everything is perfect, irrigation is okay, the plants are perfect. So it was a good project, because last week we were in Singapore, for instance, and it was not so simple because we had some problems which were very quickly solved in 3 days, but some days. So we L'enquête de... Le... Comment j'ai voulu construire... So, Academy of Science, I didn't tell you exactly when we were speaking with Bonnie Fischer. I told you it was what happened in my heart. No, I'm sorry, my accent is maybe not very good, but... Oui. So, no, not everybody is speaking French, so I think. Yes, question will be, it will be easier after, maybe. It will be easier maybe after. So finally, everything was installed, and it will be interesting if you can, if you have time to look at the vertical garden now next week when the scaffolding is removed, because during the first weeks it goes very quickly. So if you have an opportunity to go every 2 or 3 weeks to have a look, it's interesting because the 2-3 first months are interesting. So now I shall show you some photos of why I did make vertical garden, because actually it was when I did begin about 40 years ago, because you know I'm not so young, I'm 57, and when I did begin when I was about 13 years old, I had aquariums, and of course I didn't know that in tropical aquariums it was very important to have plants growing in the water, because the plants release, of course, oxygen and take out CO2, this you know, but also it was very important to take out the waste products. So, of course, now everybody knows that to have purification of water with plants, it's very, very important, but 40 years ago, nobody was speaking about that except people interested by aquariums. So I did take a cutting of a philodendron of my mother in the living room. I did put in the aquarium to have the roots taking out all the waste products. Waste products, it means in aquariums mostly nitrogen, nitrates, and O3, and also the other derivative from sulfur and everything. So I did see that the philodendron was very well growing, and I did try to have more and more plants above the aquarium, and that's why I did begin the vertical garden. But actually, at the beginning, it was not at all to make vertical garden. It was simply to try to have a biological filter. So now everybody is interested by this, but 40 years ago, it was not exactly the same. So after I had the opportunity, when I was a student, to go to for the first time when I was 19 in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia and Thailand. And when I did travel, I did see that plants were growing, of course, without soil on the trunks and branches of the trees, but also this I didn't know that epiphytic plants growing on trunks and branches were common in tropical rainforests, but what I did not know at that time is that also many plants were also growing on the rocks. And in the shade of tropical rainforests, on the rocks, you have many species and many families which are growing only on the rocks. For instance, begonias. Everybody knows begonias. There are more than 1,000 species of begonia, and more than 80% of the begonia species are growing on the rocks and never on the soil in the forest. Some are epiphytic, but most are growing on the rocks. Among the gesnerias, for instance, you know the Cape violet, you know, you know it's Sampolia, eh? No, Sampolia. Sampolia, it's from South Africa, not from South Africa. It's called South African violet, but actually it's growing only on the rocks of a cave in the north of Tanzania. I've been there on Boni Caves. So you see, many plants actually are growing only on the rocks and not on the soil. And what is important is that these plants very often have a very tight endemism, because actually they are dispersed only by the raindrops on the fruits, because they have tiny seeds. So it means that all these plants spread in the favorable place, but they have many problems to spread, to have a long distance dispersal. So all these plants growing on the rocks have very narrow endemism and are, of course, very fragile to destruction of habitat. So I was more and more sensible to all these problems. And during my studies at university, of course, and after for my research and for my thesis, my PhD, and after other theses, I did work more and more on the adaptation of the plants on the environments in tropical rainforest, and many of these environments are soil-less, of course, biotopes. So it's why I did have, of course, a lot of inspiration from nature. I show you some pictures. So, for instance, here you see it's in western Thailand. You see waterfalls, and according to the distance of the water, you have different kinds of species growing. In the middle, for instance, it's a grass. It's a Pogonaterum paniceum. It's a small grass. When you are a little bit further, you have many plants of the nettle family, Elatostema. And after, you have, for instance, many impatiens and begonia in the shaded places. So you see, according to the distance to the waterfall, you have different species which are growing. So all these environments, vertical environments, are very diverse in species. In this case, you have trees because it's a limestone cliff. It's in the Halong Bay in Vietnam. And in this case, you know, when you have limestone cliffs, you have many caves, and you have erosion, which gives many holes. And in these holes, the roots can be very firmly fixed. So in this case, you can have not only small plants, herbaceous or shrubby, but you can also have many trees growing because they are anchored deeply in the holes of the limestone cliffs. In some cases, you see you have a mix between plants and stones. And in the restaurant here, for instance, in the Academy of Science, the guy, David, did try also to make a mix of plants and stones. So it's in nature also you have very interesting mix like this. Here it's in Hawaii, not so far from here. Enfin, not so far, 4,500 kilometers, something like that. But for Paris, it's here in San Francisco, it's not so far. And here it's in Oahu, and you see it's interesting because on this volcano stones, you have it's not the same as in the case of limestone. You have no deep incrustations, so you have no accumulation of humus. So in this case, you have only small plants, herbaceous and shrubby. And also I show this to show you that a vertical garden actually can be not simply flat, but can have different kinds of shapes. And you see, in this case, it's very interesting because you have really wrinkled stones. And I try in my works to also to show that a vertical garden is not simply to cover a flat thing. It can have different shapes. You see also here it's totally moss covered. And of course, when I make vertical gardens, if I install and I put nothing, after a few weeks, many mosses are growing. You know, it's always very difficult to grow mosses, but actually, with what I do, it's very, very easy because you have simply to give some water, and you have mosses which are coming. You see some, it's in Ecuador, you have some shapes, but in this case, it's not at all like a vertical garden. Why? Because it's a climber, it's a vine from the morning glory family. And in this case, you have only one species covering the old branches of the tree. Of course, it looks like a giant bat, so its architecture is very interesting. But if you want to do something like that with vertical garden, actually, it's the same problem as with ivy, for instance. You have only one species covering all the surface. That's why on my vertical gardens, I absolutely never use climbers because if they are growing, they cover everything. So it's impossible to use them. But sometimes in nature, you can have very interesting things. And also, you see, inspiration is very simple. When I make a column covered with plants, it's simply like this. Of course, this is quite a bad example because it's the the trunk of an oil palm in Malaysia, and you know now the problem of oil palms in Malaysia and Indonesia especially, where they cut all the forest, and now Indonesia is the second country for emission of CO2 because they cut all the forests they burn to replace by oil palm. But now it's good because now people all over the world think that oil palm is really something very dangerous, a little bit for us, but it's not a problem. It's dangerous, of course, for the environment because you have to destroy forests. But if you want to make a vertical garden, the trunk of an oil palm can be very inspiring because you have many different fern species. You have also some ficus, some medinillas growing on. You see, this is a cliff. You see, when I try to make my vertical garden, I try to do something like this. And often, I like to have curves, you see, like this. Because in nature, this is in Malaysia, close to Kuala Lumpur, the limestone cliffs. And you see that this Alocasia lowi, you see, is growing vertically. And as it has big leaves, big entire leaves, and it's always the case. When you have plants growing on a cliff, if they have big leaves, always the leaves are vertical. Why? Why? Because, of course, when you have all the leaves falling on the plant, if the leaf should be like this, it should be destroyed immediately, of course. So when you have big leaves on vertical habitat, they are always vertically bending. And you have also other plants with of course, smaller leaves or leaflets. You have Nephrolepis ferns here, for instance, you see. You have other ferns, probably Pteris here. You have some climbers, like this pepper, for instance, the pepper family. But you see, my inspiration is really, you see the design, the oblique design of this Nephrolepis line here, for instance, because in nature, often the plants are following the cracks in the rocks. So it's why I like in my design to try to make this oblique design of the species installation, because in nature very often you see this type of installation of the natural installation of the plant. You see, it could look like one of my work, but not at all. It's Mother Nature. It's in Java. And you see also all these lines with this colocasia. These are curculigo also, and you see all these lines. So you see, as soon as you have enough humidity, you have many plants covering the rocks. I'm also very interested by the architecture of the plants. And for instance, this is a small ardisia from Hong Kong, because Hong Kong, everybody thinks it's only a town, but actually in Hong Kong, you can spend many days in the forest, because even in the town of Hong Kong, when you take the cable car, you are immediately in the forest. And the new territories also, you have very interesting mountains. And this ardisia primulifolia is, you see, very interesting, because the shape, it's like a circle, just fixed vertically on a slope, and the shape also of the leaves is very interesting, beautiful, and you have no competition, because if you install one plant here and one plant here, of course, as the old leaves disappear under the new leaves, you have never competition between the plants. So it's very important also, when I make my work, to try to have no competition between the plants. Many, of course, of tropical rainforest understory species have very beautiful leaf shapes. This is a begonia. It's a new species, not yet described, from southern Thailand. It looks like a fern, but it's not at all a fern, because you see the flowers of begonia at the top of the stems. This is also a begonia, a very strange species, you see, with triangular leaves. It's a new species I did discover last year in Palawan Island, in the Philippine Islands. And it will be soon described, and it should have my name, but I wait for the final description. And you see, in this case, it's growing totally on vertical surfaces without any soil, because you see the bare rock, only just maybe 1 millimeter of mosses and nothing else. Of course, the leaves can collect some dead leaves falling and have a little amount of humus, but it's a very little amount. It has very thick leaves, so it can withstand the dry season, because in Palawan, it's between the main island, Luzon, from Philippines and Borneo, but it's a very special climate, intermediate between equatorial climate and monsoon climate. So it's, you have very special adaptation of plants, and this begonia is one of these examples. So you see different kind of, it's a plant of the pepper family, it's a piper. So you see very beautiful architecture, and I try, of course, to select plants with beautiful architecture. So you can have natural vertical gardens, but if you don't care, it's in Bombay, this, for instance. So if you don't care, of course, the small plants will know, the ferns or the small herbaceous plants have no problem, but the ficus, of course, when they are growing along the pipes, of course, you have problems after few months or very few years. So it's why in my work I have never direct connection between the plants and the building. It's why I make a metallic frame to have insulation between the plants and the buildings, because I think what is interesting is to try to combine the vertical garden, I mean the installation of plants in town, with architecture, and not to destroy the architecture with the plants. So it's why I never try to do this. Of course, it can be very beautiful, like this Buddha head in Thailand, but of course, it's not the aim of what we have to do. So you see the roots are growing here. In this case, it's on a tree trunk. And here, it's not in nature, it's on one of my vertical gardens. So you see, I use a felt, which is made of old recycled clothes. Clothes only made of polyamide and polyester, so totally synthetic, old clothes, cut in very small pieces. And it acts exactly in the same way as the cover of mosses on the rocks or on the tree trunks. So it means it can retain the water, and also all the fragments coming with the air, dust fragments, and the roots of the plants are growing inside exactly in the same way as they are growing inside the moss cover. This is a felt after maybe 2 or 3 years. So you see the big roots out, the small roots inside, so it becomes really a natural biological medium. And also what is important is all the things you don't see inside the felt is all the microorganisms, especially bacteria and fungus, which are able to catch all the big molecules of the air. Because now, you know, everybody is very interested by this, because we ask everything to the plants. We build our houses, we eat them, we use them for clothes, we use them for medication, and now we ask them to have the purification of the air of our cities. So we ask everything to the plants, but actually the plants by themselves cannot catch the big molecules, you know, the famous VOC, volatile organic compounds, and especially aldehydes. So the plants, no, they cannot take these compounds to reduce in smaller molecules, but actually only the microorganisms in association with the roots. I mean, all the fungi and bacteria in association with the roots can catch these big molecules and cut in smaller molecules that the plants can take because there are much nitrogen in these molecules, so it's very useful for the plants. But the big toxic molecules, only the microorganism can catch them. And in the felt, all these microorganisms are growing in association with the roots, because all the microorganisms which can take out the waste products from the air in the towns are actually oxygen demanding. So it's why the felt is perfect, because the felt is in direct contact with the air. It's why I never want to protect the felt. Of course, if I protected the felt, I could have less use of water, but if you have less use of water, you have also less contact with oxygen of the air, so you have less impact about reduction of the temperature of the city, and also to take out the waste products. So you have always to try to have a balance. You have to choose, and in my case, my choice, of course, is to have the felt in direct contact with the air to lower the temperature of the town and also to take out the waste products. You see also a felt after many months or maybe 2 years that it's in my home, I don't remember. You see old roots decaying, you see different types of mosses. So you see it looks really like a natural rock. So this is my new home. And you see now, same as when I was a boy, I have an aquarium, simply that now the aquarium is a little bit bigger because it's now 20,000 liters. So it's 6 by 7 meters. It's my dream since I was a boy. And I work, you see, this is my desk. I work on the water because it's a transparent glass. And when I work under my feet, I see the fish swimming under my feet. And around, it's open, you see. And so I have the plants. And I have many birds, same as here in your glass house, and I have the birds flying among the plants. And outside also there is a patio, and you see between the windows we have, is my friend, and you have many plants around the patio. This plant I love, Iris japonica, I love it. It's a very, very beautiful species. You can find in cultivation here in California, especially the one which is called Nada. You see another view of the patio. So, and I take always my shower outside, even when it's snowing. Yes, 2 days ago it was very, very cold, but I always take my shower outside on the terrace here because the bathroom is here. So when I'm outside, I see all the plants around me. So it's all the dream. So vertical garden. So you see it's very simple. A metallic frame to have insulation of few centimeters. So you have air insulation. You can also fill with material for insulation. And plastic expanded PVC sheet. And now, up to now, only in Japan, I did find recycled expanded PVC. But I'm sure now all over the world we'll find very soon recycled expanded PVC. But it's a very good material because you can staple inside, and it has a very good resistance. So you see, it's very simple. You have the metallic frame, you see, and you fix simply the plastic sheets. You see a scaffolding, exactly the same as the one you can see now at Drew School, and the installation of the small plants. It was in south of France. You see, it was a bridge. And it's all along the bridge. So you see Sylvain, who is here, and he was here in south of France. It was three years ago, this Sylvain, no? 3 years ago, this I think. Yeah. So installation can be with scaffolding, and after also you can use like this a cherry picker. It will be the case at your school to use for maintenance cherry picker. All the lines to give water, because actually the plants need, according to the seasons, between 2 and 5 liters per square meter and per day. Because I use only the water, because contrary to the soil, when you give water to a garden, you lose, of course, a lot of water through percolation. But in the case of vertical garden, of course, all the water you give is used because the felt is only 3 millimeters thick. So you have just, I like to have between 10 and 20% excess water, because it's very important to have some excess water to have not accumulation of minerals. So it's very important to have excess water, and excess water, the best is usually to use to water some other plants, or otherwise you can recycle. But what I prefer usually is to use to give water in garden just around. So here you have, you have the tank for nutrients, the pump, and I give about between 1/5 and 1/10 what they give in horticulture. I give only 0.3 grams per liter, because plants, of course, need water. Because, you know, even when you think about orchids growing in tropical rainforest, everybody thinks they have only rainwater. But actually, they have rainwater, which was through the canopy of the forest. So this water is enriched in many minerals. For instance, for potassium, which is the most important, in rainforest, you have more potassium available for plants coming from the rain through the canopy than the potassium available from the soil. So you have to know that your orchids and bromeliads growing as epiphytic, they have not only simply the rainwater with nothing else than H2O, they have nutrients inside this water. So it's why I use a small amount, 0.3 gram, is a small amount, more than they have in forest, but it remains a small amount of nutrients necessary for harmonious growth, because the aim, of course, is not to have a huge growth, it's simply to have harmonious growth. It's like you see also plants, of course, in pots, and I make the design on people involved in the installation of the plants try to follow in the best way my design, because but this I'll show you at the end for the project of the school. You see, the guys are not working with usual material for gardeners. They work with cutter and with staplers. This was my first work in a museum in Paris in 1986, a museum for science and technology in Paris. And you see, it was many vertical gardens, very interesting work, but it has no success at all. It was 1986, it was probably too early. It did last for more than 10 years, because after they did change the bridge inside the museum, but they did keep my vertical garden, but not a big success. And 8 years later, in 1994, in Chaumont-sur-Loire, in south of Paris, I did make vertical gardens again, and suddenly everybody was interested. So it's always funny. It's exactly the same work, and maybe not more interesting than the one in the museum in Paris, but suddenly everybody is interested. For me, it was not a problem, because I was finishing my PhD, so I had many other works to do. So for me, it was not a problem to have not success with the first vertical garden, but it's funny to see that suddenly everybody was interested. You see, I did also have a wall in Chaumont-sur-Loire in the same place, covered only with mosses. We were speaking about that a few minutes ago. This is one of the old ones in Paris, in Quartier Fondation. It's now 10 years old, and you see some fascia become quite interesting, because older, and I like, when my walls have many years, I like because they become more and more three-dimensional. Another work you see, which looks natural, it's also for a kind of a museum. It's actually a place, a cultural place in south of Paris. So I wanted something which looks very natural, but to look natural, you see, it's of course you have to do what is useful to do to have this natural looking. This one had much success. It was in 10 years ago with André Putman. She's a famous indoor architect in France, and it was in a hotel close to Champs-Élysées in Paris, a very high wall, because it's 30 meters high, and she told me, it's terrible, I have a patio and I have an ugly wall, can you do something? I did say, yes, of course I can do something, and so we had some problem in discussion with the owners, because it was the highest I could be able to do, and so we had some discussion, but they did say okay, and it has been a big success. Inauguration was just 2 or 3 days before 11 September 2001, but it was a big success. You see also with here is Japonica here. So you see here, for instance, you see the design. So you see each plant. Of course, at the top, I put plants which are much more adapted to full sun, full wind. And of course, when you go lower and lower, in this case, it's more and more protected from light. So it's more and more shady, and less windy, and more humid, of course, because the water is flowing along the felt. So at the top, between two sequences of watering, because there are 4 to 5 per day. So between 2 sequences, because it's every 4 or 6 hours, it can dry out, and of course the felt dries out much more quickly at the top than at the bottom. So I choose, of course, the species according to the place where they will be. This was a project also 10 years ago, but they were not interested. But actually, I did keep this idea of kind of bridges for other projects. And you see, for instance, this is a sailing. It's not a vertical garden. It's a horizontal sailing, totally covered with hanging plants, growing in tropical rainforest, especially some Hoya, like Hoya linearis, many Escinanthus, of course, many Rhipsalis for people who know the plants. Something also similar in Milano, in Italy. You see, in a cafe where you have all these hanging plants. So you see, vertical gardens can have many different shapes. And this is in a boutique, Maritain François Girbaud boutique in Paris, and you see the plants through the steps, you see, of the stair. You see, at night, it's from the street, so you see, it's quite surprising to see the screen with the publicity and the plants just behind. This was also for Maritain François Girbaud in New York, but now they did stop the boutique because it was not in a good place. But plants, you see, after 4 or 5 years, were very, very well growing, but they did give, of course, to another place. See another kind of work in a very secluded and protected place. And of course, in this case, you need artificial light because at the top you have natural light, but at the bottom, of course, you have no natural light. So in this case, you have to add some light. Another work in Paris, and people, when they come down along the stair, it seems that they are floating inside the canopy of the forest. And when people say I never put flowers, you see here, for instance, there are many flowers. I don't play only with the green. Of course, I like the different kind of foliage, the shapes, but also I like also to have flowers. And in Doge School, there will be many flowers to attract your hummingbirds. A project I did do, it was a concrete, you see, this was a concrete cliff, artificial concrete cliff in a public aquarium, and so I did put, you see, plants above, and now it's interesting because I wanted to have water flowing along the concrete, and you have algae and mosses and ferns, many plants which come naturally on the concrete, artificial concrete felt, so concrete cliff, so it becomes more and more natural. A work I did do in São Paulo, in Brazil, about evolution of the plant, so I did design this kind of spiral, and people were walking inside the spiral. Another kind of work, so you see in this case, it's actually same work as the one in the restaurant, and you see you have different oblique structure, and the plants are just behind the structure. But now I don't like to do this because I prefer, as I told you, to have the felt directly exposed to the air. But it was useful to put this stick, because in this case, I did use climbers. But you see, when you use climbers, they have to go out of the vertical garden. So it was another kind of work. Columns in a car parking. So you see, it's a very special place, car parking in Paris. It's a French embassy in New Delhi, in India, and I did cover all the pillars of the embassy. In Bangkok, on each side of an elevator, it's one of my highest up to now. It's more than 30 meters high, and as there is a restaurant at the bottom, we had to be very careful because you see people are eating just under, so to have no water, so I did put every 2 meters line on only few seconds of watering to avoid to have any water drops on the customers who are here for dinner or lunch. You see another kind of thing which looks more like rocks in a Halong Bay or something like that. Another work in Bangkok. So you see I did use many plants with long stems and long leaves. It's just installation, so it has to grow. And I think here, yes, you see, after 6 or 8 months, and you see the plants are growing along the fences. You see, after this one after 3 years, I think this. Another work in Bangkok with colons outside, so only tropical plants because it's outside. And only, you see, it's not only in chic areas, because you see here it's McDonald's, so it's when people say, oh, you make work only in very chic places, it's not the case. Though this is with Jean Nouvel, the famous Quai Branly Museum in Paris, 6 years ago now, 6 years ago. And this was a big success. And this, since this success, that everybody in the world now wants to make vertical garden. And it's normal because everybody did see it, and they did know it was one very spectacular, but one more after so many I did do before. So it was time for everybody all over the world to try to make vertical gardens. See, Eiffel Tower is very close, as you see. Of course, the design. So yes, it was in July 2006. Yes, yes, almost 5 years ago. You see. So you see, it's interesting because in winter, because here winter doesn't mean many things in San Francisco, but in Paris, winter means really winter. So you see. In winter, it's interesting to see that the vertical garden is green when all the leaves of the tree are falling. It's late November, this I think, because the leaves are on the ground, but you see vertical garden is green. Another view. This work I like very much in Japan for a Museum of Contemporary Art, 21st Century Museum by Sejima, the famous lady architect in Japan. And it's, you see, it's a blade with plants on both sides. On this side, it's only plants from the area around Kanazawa. So you see, it's also, it was the first time I did use plants from the area to cover the world. It was very funny because the day of inauguration, the Japanese from Kanazawa, Japanese people came at inauguration. They said, oh, what is this incredible fern? What did you find? And he said, you have just to travel 5 kilometers from here, and you see plenty along the road, on the walls. But it's a kind of magic of the vertical gardens. Suddenly the plants are vertical, so it means they are same as us. They are vertical, so they are not something on which you can put your feet, you can destroy, because they are in same dialogue with you, because they are vertical and they are not directly accessible. You cannot destroy them. So suddenly you have a look you look at them very differently than the way in which you look at the plants in a garden. I think it's very important about the role of the vertical garden, about the respect of the nature, simply for this reason, because they are vertical in the same way as we are vertical. And I think in conscience, it's very important to give some ways of respect for nature. It was an exhibition with plants growing in very fast-flowing water in Paris. You see, it can be also some kind of funny shapes. This was important because the living room of the house had walls, concrete walls, just 1 meter behind the windows, and I did cover with plants, so it was okay. This is a work in Paris, you see in a street where you have very classical houses, old houses from Paris, and everybody is interested because it's in a street where you have no plants at all. So it's, I like, every time I can put vertical garden in places where you have very few plants, I think it's the most interesting. And the Doge School is also interesting for that because there are not so many plants around this area at the Doge School. There's something similar in Berlin, but of course in Berlin it's very, very cold in winter, so the selection of the plants is very difficult. You cannot have as many plants as for other places which have milder climate, because in Berlin it's very, very cold. But you see, I can have at least 55, 60 species. In North Carolina, in USA, for a boutique in Charlotte. It was interesting because you have very good nurseries in this area, and I could get many plants I did never use before. I don't remember the name of the nursery, but it's a very, very good, good Plant Delight nursery. It's a very, very good nursery in Raleigh. I never know how you pronounce the name of the town. For me, it's Raleigh. It's R-A-L-E-I. And it's an incredible nursery where they have plants from everywhere in the world. And so I did use mostly plants from here. This is a museum in south of France also, so you see different kind of shapes. A small one in Tokyo, but it's interesting because I could use plants I love and very difficult to find, like this Philodendron guldii, which is very interesting. You see with leaves, let's say, in the same shape as hands, and I like very much. And also a Nephrolepis pendula, very special. A work in Shanghai, for a restaurant in Shanghai in China. Very interesting work, but only one for which I have never been paid. It's the lady, a very, very rich lady, of course, but never I got the money, but the plants don't care. You see, they are very well growing. For them, it's not a problem. This is a work in photo is not very good, but the work is interesting. It's Istanbul. So also it's a quite special climate. We never know Istanbul, you know, is it Mediterranean, is it temperate, is it cold, is it hot? It's a very special climate, and so it was very interesting in the patio to do this work. This is a special small vertical garden for this lady. She's a very good friend, Noemi, and it's only herbs. So every morning, it's why she has scissors in the hand. Every morning, she goes to cut rosemary, sage, oregano, laurel, everything, and she gives to many friends. So it's only plants you can eat as herbs for cooking. So it's very interesting because also you can use vertical gardens if you have sun enough, because of course for all these kind of plants, you need full sun. So in this case, no problem, you can do it. In Sydney, for the Qantas Air Lounges, something similar, but quite exciting in London, also for it's for SkyTeam Air Lounges. A project I like very much in Taipei, and inside the National Theatre. So you see it's a huge work for indoor work. For outdoor work, it's not huge because it's 10 by 10 meters, but for indoor work, it's a huge work. A house I did totally cover with plants in Belgium, even the roof, because sometimes also I can make roofs also, of course, covered with plants. So I did cover all the walls of the house, you see, and the roof also. You see, it's quite funny. I did say, this photo I did take just a few months ago in August or September. I did say, please cut this a little bit because you don't see the shape of the house. So, as I told you, I think it's very important to keep really the good relation between the architecture and the plants. And this I don't like because in this case, plants are too big and you don't see the architecture of the house. So you see, it's very important to have the good balance between both. Also oblique things, you see, this is with Herzog and de Meuron in Canary Islands. So it's only plants, no, mostly, not only, mostly plants from Canary Islands. So you see, so it's totally covered. Another kind of work, you see a spiral, you can go inside. So just to show you that really it can have many, many different kind of shapes. You see it was a quite ugly stair outside a very modern building in south of Paris. A huge work in south of France, in Avignon, where there is a famous festival in summer. In New York, at the cross of 58 and Lexington. It's indoor. It looks like outdoor, but actually it's indoor. 1 meter distance from the glass. One of the biggest inside I did do it's in Lisbon in Portugal. And here, in this case, because people see from very far, I did design very long, you see, plant group. So you see, for instance, anthurium, here you have maybe 200 anthurium, and a house in London, you see a very classical house with plants covering the wall. After, again, plants are a little bit too big here. This Athenaeum Hotel in London, so you see that the walls, white walls, and they wanted to cover everything. I did say, no, I think it's better to cover just the corner, and we did do this 2 years ago. This is at the top of a building with Cesar Pelli in Madrid, and it's a crystal building, and I did make a vertical garden at the top. So you see it's at the top, it's open, they receive the rain from outdoor, but it's protected outside by the glass because it's a crystal building. But you see it's quite, because it's 30 meters high, so it's really the last 30 meters of the tower. In Aix-en-Provence, you see it was a bridge like this, which was not very nice, and they did ask me to do something, and I did do something, and so you see, and Sylvain did go still a few weeks ago for the maintenance, and it's very well growing. In Madrid with Herzog and de Meuron, also one of the biggest in a one piece only, and it matches very well with the metallic structure. I like very much the work of Herzog and de Meuron. You have just, but we are here. No, here is a piano. But just in front, we have the work of Herzog and de Meuron, where they also use much metallic structure. But this one, it's not Corten, it's font. It's you know, the mix of carbon and iron. I don't know the English word. No, Corten is a kind of steel. But the mix of iron and carbon, it's we call this font, it's cambric. You see, it's a very special, before our grandparents did use a lot. And it's very beautiful because you see, it takes this color very quickly, this red color, and with plants, it matches very well, of course. You see, very important to think at the night. So during the night, it's very important to have the good light on the vertical gardens, because if you forget this, it's a black spot, simply a black spot. So it's very important to think to that. This is a recent work in a car parking, 8 floors of a car parking in south of France. So you see, when people go out, they see each time when they turn the vertical garden. So you see, for CO2 uptake, of course, it's good because in car parking, you have a lot of CO2. So for the plants, it's perfect. In close to Chicago, it's what's the name of the place, Sylvain? I never remember. Comment? Racine in Wisconsin. So for the Johnson building, he was a man who was very interested by South America for flying. So I did use only plants from South America for this project. It's in Paris, a 6 recent project also, 6 Senses. It's a spa from Thailand, but they have a place in Paris. In Bratislava is the capital of, c'est quel pays, Sylvain? Slovakia, because you know this country is so complicated because now it's many countries in Slovakia, and also a very recent beautiful work. And now I try to use many species I did not use before. And for instance, here there are some species I did not use. And there is a good work also by the architects, you see, with reflection. Here it's a mirror, and here reflection is at the other side of the lawn. So it's interesting also to think about reflection. In Kuwait, a big shopping mall in Kuwait. You see another view. In Tbilisi, in Georgia, just out of a metro station, subway. This in Balearic Islands, so you see you can go inside again the vertical garden. another view. It was just 2 or 3 months ago I did take these photos. In Austria, you see the very modern place working for photovoltaic systems. And so you see it's a blade, a free blade with plants on the one side. In Vienna, with the Jean Nouvel, again, a big, very, very big vertical garden just in front of the building. And so it was one of the last projects, this one. This one, 10 days ago in Hobart, in Tasmania, for inauguration in a museum of contemporary art. One of the biggest one in Paris, 1,500 square meters. You see it's a small canyon street, and just after installation, but you see how was the wall before it was like this. And you see now it's, of course, a little bit better like this. You see, so it's plants. Project, they did not want the project. I don't know why. Not far from here. But it was, I think it was an interesting project. A project in Rio de Janeiro also, still waiting. This in Bali, it will be a project in a few months. In Miami with Herzog and de Meuron, you have to cover about 100 columns for a museum of contemporary art. So it will be a huge, huge work. Next week, no, in two weeks in Hong Kong, it will be a vertical garden inside hotel of a university, the Polytechnic University. It's a hotel, and inside the lobby, you see, have a huge vertical garden, and it's in 2 weeks. A project for Athens in Greece. So you see, I did design because architects often are very, very shy in some way about the installation of the plants, and either they want to cover everything or they are very shy often. And this I did make the design of this kind of hands embracing the building, and so we are still waiting for some authorization, but I think it's interesting work. This will be the biggest with Jean Nouvel in Sydney, where you have to cover many, up to 135 meters, and you see I have many patches up to 50 meters high. You see, all along the building. A project for Dubai. I'm still waiting. Blades covered with plants from the top. This is here to finish. So we are in the school, and so you see, I wanted, of course, to have some lines of plants going from one wall to the other, to have to forget the separation. And of course, I told you at the top, you see the Artemisia, for instance, Eriogonum, Ancelia, Chilopsis, all the Salvia, all these plants which love sun are at the top. Of course, some like Galvesia speciosa, which will attract hummingbirds, has a good place, and there are many, because I love these plants. And after, when you go down, you see the Euchera, the Viola, you see Oxalis, you see the Woodwardia ferns, Mahonia. So you see all these are shade-loving plants, and at the top, sun-loving plants and dry soil-loving plants. Installation photo taken yesterday by Bonnie. You see the small plants, installation of the small plants. When I did choose 1.5 years ago, this my beloved Artemisia tridentata, the plants at the school at the installation, and it will be like this, but it will be more color than this, because I wanted for this project, because I did tell you at the beginning that for me, something is so special here. It's temperate, but you have the chance to have hummingbirds, so I did put many species to attract hummingbirds. So it will be much more red than this, but I think it's the last one. Merci.
So we're going to open it up to questions to the audience in just a moment, but I wanted to let those of you who are holding tickets for the Darwin program in the planetarium on orchids, I've held the start of that show for a couple of minutes. They're loading now. It begins in 2 minutes, so if you'd like to make your way to that show now, feel free. But we're going to open up to questions for Patrick, and I'll bring the microphone around by a show of hands. And so if you just raise your hand, that way the entire room will be able to hear your question. We'll start with the first one right here.
Madame, she has a microphone.
Can you tell us a little bit about the maintenance that's required for these installations?
Of course, it's very important to have a low maintenance. So usually for outdoor walls, it's 2 or better 3 times a year. 3 times is good, and especially in a quite cold climate like Paris. Of course, at the autumn to clean, and in spring also to clean, or even to see if winter was very cold to add some more plants. But what the most important is in the midsummer, at the end of July or early August, to prune the plants which did grow a little bit too much, to have time to grow again before the autumn, and to have a good appearance in winter. Because here you have no problem of winter, as I told you, but you see, when you think to places like Paris, you have to think about winter, so it's very important. The most important, actually, maintenance is the one in the middle of summer. And otherwise, you have to check, of course, if watering is well working, but it's automatic, but it's good to have an eye sometimes, just to check if somebody did not switch off the water. But this is nothing. The real maintenance is 2, but better 3 times a year. For indoor, of course, if you are in a restaurant, it has to be very clean. So in a restaurant or a boutique, it's better every 1.5 or 2 months. So, chez Girbaud, tu vas tous les mois et demi? 2 months. 2 months. Oui, for indoor, it's good 6 times a year, and for outdoor, 3 times a year. Something like that is good to have in memory.
Let me bring the microphone over to you. So we're also video recording. I want to make sure they can hear it on the video.
Do you ever have problems with pests, insects?
Insects. Of course, there are insects, and it's a good thing. That, for instance, butterflies for some flowers. So, but when you speak of insects, I think you speak either from mosquitoes or something like that. Mosquitoes you have not, simply because you have not standing water. There are mosquitoes, they need standing water. So you have never problems of mosquitoes. Sometimes you have some attacks of plants, but not outdoor. Indoor sometimes, because indoor you have no wind, you have no rain. So indoor, you have to be more careful about problems of insects. But now you have very good products which are totally biological efficient. But in my home, for instance, where I have birds, lizards, and frogs, impossible to use any product. I use only hot water. So I have a pump, and I make vaporization of hot water. Hot water is very efficient if you have any insects to remove them. So in my home, I use only hot water to try to remove insects. But otherwise, no spiders, no mosquitoes. But of course, when you have flowers, butterflies, and of course some bees, if you have flowers for bees, which can come. Madame.
Can you explain the process of selling in or presenting a concept to a client? So all they know is that they want a vertical garden, but just like an architect, there's sort of a tug of war sometimes. I'm just wondering about the process of working with the client to get something that they can visualize. And
it's very, very simple. I do not think I have a website and articles, and so people come to me. I do nothing else. And project, it depends. Sometimes people ask me, please come to this place and tell me what you should like to do. Sometimes it's very clear. We had some discussion with Bonnie, but it was almost clear, except I did say, oh, please add one part on the northern part, because I want that the students can see the wall. The wall has not to be only for people outside. They have to see also, so we could add, and it's very important, a small part. So I have discussions. Sometimes it's very, very clear, but after me, I explain, I have documents to explain. It's so simple, to make a metallic frame, to fix a plastic sheet and to staple a kind of a floor mop, it's totally simple. So you can explain this in a very few documents, and it's very easy to follow this. So for the project, I tell you, sometimes it's totally finished. Sometimes as there are discussions. Sometimes they have to do everything. So it's.
And on the maintenance, you just answered that question. Do you have a team of people? Your projects are all over the world. Do they fly in twice a year to every one of these installations?
It's very important. It's why Sylvain comes always for the installation of the vertical garden. It's why sometimes I have to delay some to have not overlapping. And I always ask that the people working with him for installation should be the people in charge of maintenance, because when they see the installation, of course, they are the best for imitations. But this is not a problem. There are enough imitations. It's not a problem. But it's very important that people seeing everything about installation are the best ones to maintain, because they know how it's made, and also Sylvain can explain everything very clearly. And so it's so. In this case, it's okay. And if they have some problem, they can send me photo or email, and I answer, or my assistant in Paris answers. So, because up to now, I have about 250 walls all over the world, and there is not a single one where we cannot answer to problems.
We'll take our next question
it's
from the
living
left
thing, so
side.
sometimes there are problems. Of course.
From the left side, our next question right here.
Et puis après, il y a le jeune homme.
Hi. I have two questions. First, how long does each panel last? Will it decay and need to be replaced over time? And also, how do you deal with the other weeds that move in, and has that been a problem in other places?
So how it lasts, difficult to tell you, because I can tell you simply for the oldest, because I never replace. So I can tell you the oldest is 29 years old now. It's in my home since 1982. So I don't understand your question. When you speak to replace, I never replace, never. It's not like something you change. I never change. And the felt, the felt, I tell you, in my home, I have the same felt since 29 years. And it's made, I told you, polyamide. So how polyamide lives much, much longer than us. So I can tell you just up to 29 years, nothing else. And after you did ask... no, weeds, you have two ways to have weeds. If you have not enough plants at planting, when the felt is exposed to the air, of course, you can have weeds coming. This is one thing, and sometimes in some nurseries you get plants with weeds inside the plants. But the first year you have problem with weeds, not always, but sometimes problem with weeds. But after the first year, when the felt is covered, you cannot have weeds, because the weeds cannot germinate, because the felt is no longer exposed. So problem of weeds is only for the first year, so you have to be really careful to remove. If some small weeds are no problem at all, but of course if you have some seeds of salix or something like that, you have to be more careful to remove, but only the first year.
We'll take the next question from right here.
You mentioned that you like to encourage the aerobic microbiology.
Oui.
In the substrate. Are you inoculating it at all, or are you just depending on the native microbiology to infiltrate?
Only about native, because you have not only native, because when you put, you see, I put many plant species. For instance, in the school, I did install more than 100 species. So at the beginning, as you know, mycorrhiza and everything have special association according to the plants. For instance, the cyanotus, they have many associations with the roots, as you know. So already, when you put plants, you have already many different kind of bacteria and fungi. And also, from the air, when it's working, you have still other which can come. So I do absolutely nothing, simply. The fact to use many different species is the best guarantee to have the best microorganisms, because when you read papers about Carex, about everything, about the depolluting effect of the plants, and when you see how it's made, which are really the different microorganisms, it's usually not very reliable works. So I think the best is to have many plant species. It's the best way to be sure to have the best biodiversity among what you don't see the microorganisms.
Our next question, moving 2 rows to your right here, sir. To your left now.
Just a question. When you get the plants, obviously many of them have been grown in a growing medium like a soil. Do you wash the roots then and put it into your felt?
No. I remove between half and 2/3 of the... usually I use plants grown in about 9 centimeter containers, small. What I like is the biggest plants in the smaller containers. I remove most of the soil, but I leave, of course, some parts of the soil exactly for the same reason as I did explain. Never washing, never, absolutely never. So I remove sometimes, if roots are very sick, you can take a knife to cut apart. It's not a problem. Traumatism of roots, it's not a problem as soon as you keep roots. Some species are sensitive. For instance, for indoor and tropical plants, Medinilla, for instance, is a genus of epiphytic Melastomataceae, especially from Philippine Island, for Magnifica. They hate to be too much disturbed. Also, the grass I did show you on the cascade, Pogonaterum, they hate also if you cut too much the roots. But for most, except very few plants, on Cyanotus also, you told me some problems with Cyanotus also. So some, but now we know which one can have problem, but for 90% of the plants, we can remove most of the seed, but never wash, never.
And just behind her for the next question.
Hi, I was just wondering about the irrigation. I don't know if I really caught how the irrigation works, and so I was wondering one thing: if there's excess irrigation water with a nutrient in it, do you recycle that water through the wall? And also, do you have any projects where you've used gray water or collected rainwater for irrigation?
So, for instance, the project I did show you in Dubai, you see the last one I did show you with, it's a huge, I don't know if it will be done, but it's a 130 meters and between 6 and 8, and altogether it's 25,000 square meters. And for this, I did ask only to use water from air conditioning. And only, because it should be 3 couple of towers, only with water of air conditioning, I could have 3 times the size of vertical garden. I could have 65,000 square meters, even when consuming about 5 liters per square meter per day. Because, you know, each individual will release through respiration and transpiration between 1.5 liter of water. And this is taken out by air con, and it's lost. And the gray water, it's perfect for the plants, gray water, because high phosphorus content, it's absolutely perfect. But when you want to try to use, it's always a problem for security. People say, oh, yes, but it's gray water, it's not clean. So you have, in this case, to have treatment of water. And for instance, it will be the case in Australia for the big project with Jean Nouvel. We will use gray water, rainwater, but the gray water, they have to have such treatment. So about, is it better ecologically to have too much treated gray water or to use tap water? I'm not sure. But in this case, to be ecologically correct, we'll use gray water. But me, what I should like is not to use treated gray water. I should like to use directly gray water. But this, of course, if you have people close to the wall, you can say, oh, but if they receive, but gray water is not black water, so gray water has no problem. Of course, water from toilets is different, but gray water is from shower, from washing machine. It cannot be a problem, but even in this case, in a few years it will be much more easy, but even now it's not so easy. So what is easy, of course, is to collect rainwater. Everybody is okay to use rainwater. It's very easy. But otherwise, as I told you, I try to use water to have only 10 to 20% excess. And this is important to have some excess, as I did tell you, to have a rinse effect. And what is better, sometimes I recycle, but what I prefer is to use this water to give water to other plants around. Because when you have to recycle water, you have to be very careful about the content of minerals and about pH. Because often pH goes very down. And we had a problem in Kuwait, for instance. At the beginning, it was very well growing. And after, they did send after 1 year photos, and many plants had problems. And it was not easy to understand. It was not the light, because it was not many different plants and not same light requirements, not same food requirements, not same humidity requirements. It was very difficult to understand. And Sylvain did go again to the place to check what happened. And suddenly, we did learn they did recycle the water without saying anything. And they did not check pH, and pH was under 3. I don't know if you imagine. 3, if you put your finger inside, it's not good at all. So it's plants. What's incredible is that many plants were still perfect, but and after they did change, and plants after 3 months were perfect. But so if there is a recycling of water, you have to be very, very careful about mineral contents and conductivity of the water. As soon as it's more than 800, you have to be careful. And pH, as soon as it's below 5.5 or 6, you have to be very, very careful. Otherwise, you can, but in this case, you have to be careful.
Our next question comes from the second row.
Do you have to get any permits for these? And do you have any legal insurance?
Do you have
permits for the
permits?
city? Permits, like legal permits.
Legal permits.
Permits.
Yes, of course.
Insurance?
Often, no,
Insurance?
very often, for instance, in Paris, I have a project in 2 months in Paris for a wall outside, and of course, the man has to get all the permission from the town. Yes, almost always. You had not this problem here? I think you are. Always in Bali, I did show you the project in Bali. It did take almost one year late because there were problems with the temples, because in Bali the problem is different. Is the distance to the temple, so and it was a problem of distance. So you see, it can be different kinds, but it's authorizations either from temples like this or from a town. Of course, for each project. For Quai Branly, for instance, it was a big problem because at the beginning, Jean Nouvel wanted simply metallic frame on the facade. And everything was decided on all permits like this. And suddenly he did call me, do you think we could do, because before we did do already something together, do you think we could do something with the real plans? And he said, yes, of course, but they had to change everything about the permits, and they had to ask to people around if they were okay or not for the project. So I had to have discussion with people around to explain what I wanted to do. And so yes, all over the world, I think it's different ways, but it's the same, and it's normal. It's normal. What? No, not myself, but for instance, sometimes I have to discuss and to explain. In Sydney, for the big project with Jean Nouvel, I did make a conference in the townhouse in front of the lady mayor of the town of Sydney to explain the project. So sometimes, yes, when I visit for a project, often I meet the important people. I think last time when I came 1.5 years, I did make a conference also. It was important for this, for this when I did make the conference in the town of San Francisco, when we did explain the two school project. Yes, yes.
So we have time for 2 more questions. We'll take the next one from the front row on the left side.
No,
okay.
He has no questions. He knows everything.
We'll move back one.
Hi. For external installations, can you install them north-facing and east and west-facing?
Okay, so north-facing, you mean in the northern hemisphere? No, because in Sydney, it's always, when we speak of north and south, it's always terrible. No, it depends. for instance, in Madrid, I did make the big one, totally south. And in this case, north maybe should be easier in climate, special when very hot. But usually, I prefer not north, usually, in any place of the world. If it's very cold, of course, south is better. If climate is mild, south, east, west, or even northeast or northwest is okay. Quai Branly is terrible, it's north, for instance. So just a little bit northwest, because late afternoon you have a little bit sun. But actually, of course, the species are different. For a north wall, I put more ferns, more plants which don't need sun, and there are less flowers. Of course. But but of course, in Germany, if I should have to do something in a north-facing wall, it should be very difficult, because climate is so cold in winter. So in New York, the same. If I can do something outside in New York, it has to be south or southeast or southwest, but not north. It's impossible. Even if you choose the dwarf conifers, if you choose plants losing the leaves in winter, if it's north-facing, you have to forget. Yeah.
And our final question from the fourth row on the right side.
Hi. So I was wondering, what is like the average depth of these planting mediums that these plants live in?
A planting medium? It's
like, is it like...
No, the planting medium is 2 times 3 millimeter. The felt.
The felt?
2 times 3 millimeter.
And you said it was like in little bits?
What?
I thought it was like in little bits.
Bits?
You cut it up in small pieces? The felt?
No. You have the plastic sheet, and you staple the felt 2 times 3 millimeter on the plastic sheet, and you open the first felt to put the plant, and you staple right, left, and under. But it's 2 times 3 millimeters. It's like this, the medium.
That's it?
Of course.
That's it?
But it's why how I could do 50 meters high. If it should be 2 centimeters, it should be very, very heavy. 2 centimeters, you can imagine on such a surface. It should be so heavy. But 3 millimeters, I have no problems, and no problem of dilatation with heat and cold, because it's so thin. So it means nothing, dilatation. It's amazing. It's same as mosses covering the rocks. Same.
If
same. I should give more precise photo of this, because one time again people did not really understand. I should show better photos to show it's really only 2 times 3 millimeters. It's this. It's this.
I just wanted to invite anybody who is interested in staying in touch with the Drew School installation, about which we're very excited. If you have an interest in becoming a part of that resource for the city and for the area, I'd love to have you see me after, or drop me an email, sam@drewschool.org, and we'd like to create a friends group just to get your input and to learn from you about what we could do to make it an even greater resource for everybody. You can imagine what our students are going to be experiencing tomorrow afternoon. We're having an all-school assembly with Monsieur Blanc. So thank you.
Merci.